And to my family, thank you for the support and all the love you guys give. Thank you for fighting with me. I love you all so much. I'm done. Thank you. Thank you.
For 5 full seconds, she kept her foot on the gas. Not a flinch, not a breath off the accelerator. Straight into a brick wall at 100 miles per hour. 2 people died. She went on TikTok. It's 5:30 in the morning, July 31st, 2022, Strongsville, Ohio. The roads are empty, the kind of empty that only exists before the world wakes up. And moving through that silence is a metallic bronze Toyota Camry. Not cruising, not drifting, accelerating, hard and deliberate, down Progress Drive, a dead-end industrial road that terminates into a wall of solid brick. Inside that car are 3 people. Behind the wheel, 17-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla, front passenger, her 20-year-old boyfriend, Dominic Russo, backseat, their 19-year-old friend, Devon Flanagan. The car hits 100 miles per hour. It doesn't swerve. It doesn't slow. It stays locked onto a dead-straight path. It jumps a curb, crosses a patch of grass, and drives directly into the load-bearing brick wall of a plumbing supply building. The front end of that Camry ceases to exist. Dominic Russo and Devon Flanagan die instantly. Mackenzie Shirilla survives. And in the weeks that follow, while 2 families bury their sons, Mackenzie goes on TikTok. She attends concerts. She smiles for cameras. When investigators pull the black box and reconstruct every second of that final approach, they don't find the signature of an accident. No braking, no swerving, foot fully on the gas for 5 full seconds straight into a wall. They find the signature of a decision. They charge her with murder. So let me ask you something right now, before we dive into the dark, twisted history that led to this moment. Do you think someone can decide to end everything, to take multiple lives, in just a few seconds like that? Or does something have to build up over months, even years, until a person finally snaps? Because that question, that is exactly what this entire case comes down to. To understand how 3 teenagers ended up in a crumpled mass of metal at 5:30 a.m., we have to rewind. Long before the headlines, we need to look at the 3 young people inside that car. They weren't strangers. They were tightly woven into the same social circle in Strongsville, a tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone. But the dynamic between them was far from simple. Davion Flanagan was 19 years old. By all accounts, Davion was the light in every room he walked into. Adopted at age 8 alongside his 2 sisters, he had built an incredible life for himself. He was a star running back for the Strongsville High School football team. During the off-season, he spent his time working part-time as a youth swim coach, adored by the kids he trained. He had just graduated high school, was working full-time, and had already applied to barber college for the upcoming fall. On the night of July 30th, Davion was simply looking for a ride. He was a friend who happened to step into the back seat of a vehicle that was already acting as a pressure cooker. The real core of the tension lived in the front 2 seats. Dominic Russo was 20. He was close to his family, passionate about music, basketball, and trading stocks. He was young, ambitious, and trying to navigate his early 20s. But for 4 years, since Mackenzie was 13 and he was 16, he had been locked into an incredibly intense, volatile, on-again, off-again relationship with Mackenzie Shirilla. By 2022, Mackenzie was 17. She was an aspiring social media influencer, highly active on TikTok, where she posted lifestyle videos, makeup tutorials, and clothing reviews. To her followers, her life looked curated, clean, and glamorous. Some of her high school classmates, however, painted a different picture, claiming she frequently tried to emulate Regina George, the cruel, domineering antagonist from the movie Mean Girls. By 2021, the teenage couple had actually started living together, primarily at Dominic's parents' house. But behind closed doors, away from the aesthetic TikTok feeds, their relationship was a minefield of emotional swings, explosive arguments, and toxic codependency. If you've ever been around or stuck inside that kind of dynamic, you know exactly how it operates. It's an emotional roller coaster where the highs are euphoric, but the lows feel apocalyptic. Arguments don't just stay arguments. They turn into something heavier, darker, and deeply unsafe. According to Dominic's family, The couple broke up and reunited more times than anyone could count. Dominic's brother later told investigators he had repeatedly witnessed Dominic calling Mackenzie's parents, begging them to come pick her up because she was screaming and refusing to leave his house. The toxicity wasn't just verbal. It was escalating into physical and psychological intimidation. Investigators later uncovered a video filmed by Dominic just days before the crash. In the footage, Mackenzie can be heard explicitly threatening to break into his house and key his car. But there was an even more chilling warning sign. Just 2 weeks before the fatal impact, Dominic called his mother, Christine Russo, in absolute terror. He was stranded somewhere in Strongsville, and he needed help. Mackenzie was driving him around, and she was driving erratically, using the car as a tool of psychological torture. Dominic's mother immediately sent a family friend to rescue her son. When that friend arrived at the scene, they witnessed an explosive fight. They later told police they heard Mackenzie screaming at the top of her lungs, "I'm going to wreck this car right now." As she screamed, she was actively hitting Dominic with her hands. This wasn't a relationship that was merely fading away. It was an unstable orbit collapsing under its own weight. Dominic wanted out. Friends and prosecutors later noted that in July 2022, Dominic was actively trying to end the relationship for good, but Mackenzie refused to let go. Now, put that exact dynamic inside a moving vehicle. Late at night, you have Mackenzie behind the wheel, furious that the boy she considered her soulmate was slipping away. You have Dominic in the passenger seat, exhausted, anxious, and trapped. And you have Deviation in the back seat, completely oblivious to the depth of the malice, sitting directly in front of him, just wanting to get home safely. There is no audio from inside that car during those final minutes. We don't know the exact words that were exchanged as they turned down Progress Drive. We don't know if Dominic was begging her to slow down, or if Deviation realized what was happening. But we do know this. Something shifted completely in Mackenzie Shirilla's mind, because we don't have a survivor who is willing or able to recount those final seconds. Investigators had to rely on a different kind of witness. A witness that doesn't lie, doesn't misremember, and doesn't have an emotional bias. They relied on data. Minutes before the crash, surveillance footage from a nearby building captured Mackenzie's Toyota Camry driving down the suburban streets. The footage shows the car making a turn. It's smooth. It's controlled. The speed is completely normal. If you saw it on a security monitor, you wouldn't think twice. It proves that Mackenzie was in full possession of her motor skills. She was fully capable of navigating a vehicle safely. The car was functioning perfectly. And then, the car turns onto Progress Drive. Progress Drive is a straight, wide road inside a commercial business park. At 5:30 in the morning, it is entirely desolate. There are no other cars, no pedestrians, no unexpected obstacles. It is a dead end that terminates into a series of industrial buildings. The moment the Camry straightens out on Progress Drive, the vehicle changes behavior. The speed starts climbing. It's not a gradual acceleration. It is a violent, deliberate pinning of the throttle. Think about your own driving instincts for a moment. You ever press the gas a little too hard by accident? Maybe your foot slips, or you misjudge a lane change. Your body reacts instantly. Your brain registers the unexpected surge of speed. Adrenaline spikes, and your natural human instinct forces you to ease off the pedal. You correct the mistake. That is a hardwired, survivalist human instinct. But on Progress Drive, that instinct never shows up. The accelerator pedal stays down, all the way down, for seconds that must have felt like an eternity to the passengers inside. Mackenzie keeps her foot completely floored. The car hurtles down the empty road, aiming directly for the brick wall of Plidco, a plumbing manufacturing building. When a car crashes by accident, the physical evidence left on the road tells a very specific story. Drivers panic. They react, even in the absolute worst-case scenarios. If a driver falls asleep and wakes up at the last second, or if they are highly intoxicated, there's almost always a frantic, desperate attempt to avoid the impact. They slam on the brakes, leaving black skid marks on the pavement. They yank the steering wheel violently to the left or right, causing the car to slide sideways into the object. But on this road, there were no skid marks. There was no evidence of swerving. When investigators pulled the vehicle's event data recorder, commonly known as the black box, What they found sent chills down their spines. The telemetry data from the final 5 seconds before the crash painted an undeniable picture of intent. 5 seconds before the impact, the car was traveling at 74 miles per hour, with the accelerator fully pressed to 100%. The brakes were entirely off, and the steering wheel was kept perfectly straight. For seconds out, the speed climbed to 81 miles per hour, the throttle remained pinned, and the wheel did not move. 3 seconds before impact, the vehicle surged to 88 miles per hour under that exact same continuous force. At 2 seconds, the speedometer read 94 miles per hour. 1 second before hitting the brick wall, the car reached 98 miles per hour. At the exact millisecond of impact, the vehicle struck the building at a terrifying 100 miles per hour. Throughout those entire 5 seconds, the gas pedal was pressed at maximum capacity. It was a sustained, continuous, unrelenting action. The steering column registered 0 degrees of deviation. She didn't flinch. She didn't try to miss the wall. She kept the wheels pointed dead center at the brick building. The brakes were never touched, not even a millisecond before the metal hit the brick. The data proved that this crash did not behave like an accident. It behaved like a missile. And naturally, the question for the Strongsville Police Department and the Cuyahoga County prosecutors instantly became, why? For the first few days, the community treated the incident with the profound, somber grief you'd expect for a horrific teenage car accident. 2 young men with bright futures were dead. The driver, Mackenzie, was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, suffering from severe injuries, including multiple broken bones. Her family asked for prayers, but as Mackenzie began to heal physically, the narrative outside the hospital walls began to warp. Investigators searched the vehicle and the scene thoroughly. They ruled out mechanical failure. The Camry steering, brakes, and engine were in perfect working order before the impact. They looked at the road. There were no hazards, no oil slicks, no deer that had darted across the asphalt. They checked the timeline. Nothing external had forced that vehicle to accelerate. The focus turned completely inward, to the driver, to what was happening in her mind. And then, Mackenzie Shirilla was released from the hospital. What happened next is what transformed this case from a local tragedy into an international media circus. Social media got involved. Mackenzie was an influencer, and to a teenage influencer in 2022, social media was water. It was how she breathed. But the way she chose to use her platforms in the immediate aftermath of killing 2 people left the public completely horrified. Videos began to surface on TikTok. Clips started circulating across Reddit and X. Millions of people who had never stepped foot in Ohio were suddenly staring at their phone screens, watching the sole survivor of a double fatality. And what they saw didn't sit right with them. In the months between the crash and her formal arrest, Mackenzie appeared to be living her absolute best life. She posted videos of herself dancing at music festivals and concerts. She attended Halloween parties, dressing up and smiling radiantly for the camera. In one highly controversial video, she posed confidently while an audio track played in the background, showing absolutely no visible signs of physical or emotional trauma. Even worse, videos surfaced from before the crash that painted her character in a deeply disturbing light. In one TikTok video found on her public account, Mackenzie looked directly into the camera and proudly declared that she was the exception, just a girl who can do whatever she wants and never get caught. The internet reacted with a wave of absolute fury. The public didn't see a grieving girlfriend who had miraculously survived a tragedy. They didn't see the brokenness, the survivor's guilt, or the quiet mourning that society expects from someone who has lost their soulmate. Instead, they saw an icy, detached, narcissistic teenager who seemed completely disconnected from the reality that her actions had put 2 young men in the ground. Davion Flanagan father would later describe those videos as a knife to the heart, watching the girl who killed his son celebrating life while his son's room sat empty. Now, there is a massive problem with public perception on social media. Once an online crowd forms an opinion early on, it becomes an unstoppable train. It is nearly impossible to change. Even when nuance is introduced, even when medical records are filed, that first impression sticks like glue. Before a single juror was selected, before a judge ever banged a gavel, Mackenzie Shirilla had already been tried, convicted, and condemned by the court of public opinion. To millions of onlookers, she wasn't a victim of a terrible car crash. She was a monster who had gotten away with murder. By the time the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office reviewed the completed accident reconstruction report, the toxic relationship history, and the chilling black box data, they knew they couldn't treat this as simple, reckless operation. They couldn't even treat it as aggravated vehicular homicide, which implies a horrific, fatal mistake caused by gross negligence. They looked at the sustained 100% acceleration. They looked at the complete lack of a reaction. They looked at her threats to wreck the car 2 weeks prior, and they said, this was a deliberate execution. They charged 18-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla with 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of felonious assault, and 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide. This changed everything, because in a standard traffic death trial, you only have to prove that the driver operated the vehicle recklessly. But when you charge someone with murder in a vehicular context, the burden of proof becomes an immense mountain. The prosecution didn't just have to prove what happened. Everyone knew what happened. The car hit a wall at 100 miles per hour. They had to prove intent. They had to prove exactly what was going on inside Mackenzie's mind in those final 5 seconds on progress drive. And that is one of the hardest things to do in the entire legal system. You can measure speed with radar. You can measure kinetic force with physics formulas. You can reconstruct a crash site down to the millimeter using laser scanners. But there is no machine that can peer inside a human brain and extract thoughts or motives from a past event. The entire trial, which began in August 2023, became a battle of pure interpretation. The trial was a bench trial, meaning there was no jury. Instead, a single woman, Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Judge Nancy Margaret Russo, would act as both judge and jury. The prosecution went first. They built their arguments second by second, using the data as their main weapon. Assistant Prosecutor Tim Troop argued passionately to the court that she had a goal, and she executed that goal precisely. Her goal was death. The prosecution walked through the timeline of that morning. They showed the security footage of the controlled, normal driving just minutes before. They argued that this proved she was completely sober enough to make conscious decisions. Then, they showed how she specifically chose progress drive, an isolated, empty road where no one could intervene, no one could see her, and no one could stop her. They argued that the 5 seconds of 100% acceleration was a choice made over and over again with every passing millisecond. She had 5 seconds to lift her foot, 5 seconds to think about Davion in the backseat, 5 seconds to look at Dominic next to her, 5 seconds to hit the brakes. But she didn't. She held it down. To the prosecution, that silence from the brake pedal wasn't an omission. It was a loud declaration of intent. Then they brought in the human context to provide the motive. They brought up the toxic history, the text messages, and the incident 2 weeks prior, where she explicitly threatened to wreck the car. They argued that Mackenzie realized Dominic was finally going to leave her, and her mindset was clear. If I can't have you, no one will. Davion was simply collateral damage, an unfortunate soul caught in the crossfire of her deadly obsession. When the defense stepped up, they faced a near impossible task. They didn't try to deny the speed. They didn't deny the data. They couldn't. Instead, they focused entirely on the state of mind, trying to find a medical and psychological explanation that could spare Mackenzie a life sentence. They argued that what happened on Progress Drive wasn't a cold, calculated murder plot. It was a tragic, horrific accident brought on by a sudden medical emergency. The defense revealed that back in 2017, Mackenzie had been formally diagnosed with POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. POTS is a medical condition that affects blood flow, causing an abnormal increase in heart rate that can occur after sitting up or standing up. In severe episodes, POTS can cause lightheadedness, fainting, or a complete temporary blackout. According to the defense theory, as Mackenzie was driving that morning, she suffered a sudden, catastrophic POTS flare-up. They claimed she lost consciousness behind the wheel. When a person passes out or experiences a severe medical seizure while driving, their body can experience a muscle spasm. The defense argued that her leg went rigid in a spasm, pinning the accelerator to the floor while she was completely unconscious. This, they claimed, explained why there were no brake marks and why the steering wheel stayed perfectly straight. She wasn't steering. She was completely passed out. To counter the prosecution's use of her post-crash social media behavior, the defense brought forward arguments about psychological trauma. They argued that trauma doesn't have a textbook face. When a teenager experiences a catastrophic event that wipes out her friends and leaves her severely injured, the human brain can enter a severe state of denial. Her TikTok dancing, her partying, her modeling. The defense claimed it was a desperate, subconscious coping mechanism to convince herself that her world hadn't actually ended. They argued that judging her guilt based on how a traumatized 17-year-old brain handles grief online was completely unreliable and deeply unfair. So Judge Nancy Margaret Russo sat on the bench, looking at two completely irreconcilable versions of the exact same teenage girl. One side saw a calculated, vindictive killer who used a 3,000-pound car to execute her boyfriend because she couldn't control him anymore. The other side saw a sick, traumatized teenager who blacked out from a chronic medical condition and woke up to a living nightmare. Both sides were looking at the exact same numbers, the exact same brick wall, and the exact same deaths. They were just looking through completely different lenses. As the trial reached its final days, the tension in the Cleveland courtroom was thick enough to feel. The families of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan sat on one side of the aisle, holding photos of their sons, weeping quietly as forensic pathologists described the final moments of their lives. Mackenzie's family sat on the other side, watching their daughter sit at the defense table, looking small, pale, and completely stripped of her social media glamour. On August 14, 2023, Judge Nancy Margaret Russo prepared to deliver her verdict. In a bench trial, the judge doesn't just say guilty or not guilty. They have to explain their legal reasoning. They have to show their work. When Judge Russo spoke, her words cut through the courtroom like ice. She made it clear from her very first sentences that she did not buy the defense's medical blackout theory for a single second. The video clearly shows the visual path of the vehicle, Judge Russo stated, her voice unwavering. The driving prior to turning onto Progress Drive was normal. It was controlled. She focused intently on the vehicle data. She noted that a person who has passed out does not maintain a perfectly straight, lane-centered path at 100 miles per hour into a specific target. If she had truly blacked out, the car likely would have drifted gradually to the left or right, hitting a curb much earlier, scraping against a light pole, or veering off the road randomly. Instead, the vehicle behaved with laser-focused intention. She morphs from a responsible driver, Judge Russo said, into literal death on wheels. The judge looked directly at Mackenzie Shirilla as she delivered her final, devastating legal conclusion. This was not reckless driving. This was murder. She had a mission, and she executed it with precision. Her mission was death. She conducted a mission of death that morning. Judge Russo found Mackenzie Shirilla guilty on all 12 felony counts, including 4 counts of murder. A week later, on August 21, 2023, the court gathered one last time for sentencing. This was the moment where the raw, human cost of Mackenzie's actions was laid bare for the world to see. Davion Flanagan's mother, Jamie Flanagan, stood at the podium, her voice trembling with a mixture of profound grief and dignity. She spoke about her son's bright future, his laughter, and the massive void left in their home. Davion was a protector, she said through tears. He was a friend to everyone. He didn't deserve to have his life stolen because of someone else's selfish rage. Dominic Russo's mother, Christine Russo, also spoke, facing the girl who had lived in her house, the girl she had tried to help. She spoke of the terror her son felt in those final weeks and the utter devastation of losing her boy. Hen, Mackenzie Shirilla, was permitted to speak, sobbing uncontrollably, shaking at the defense podium. She read a prepared statement, her voice cracking as she tried to look at the families she had shattered. To the families of Dom and Davion, Mackenzie sobbed, "I am so deeply sorry. I hope one day you can see how I would never let this happen or do it on purpose. I wish I could remember what happened. I'm just so sorry. I'm heartbroken. I love Dom and Davion. We were all friends, and Dom was my soulmate. I wish I could take all your pain away." but the apology did little to sway Judge Russo. When it came time to hand down the penalty, the judge made it clear that public safety and justice demanded a severe consequence. She sentenced Mackenzie Shirilla to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Because the two primary murder sentences were ordered to run concurrently, Mackenzie learned she would be locked away in prison until at least the late 2030s, before she would ever have a chance to breathe free air again. The courtroom doors closed. Mackenzie Shirilla was transferred to the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville, traded her aesthetic outfits for an inmate jumpsuit, and became state prisoner number W109315. The legal system had made its choice. Legally, historically, and officially, the crash on Progress Drive was a double murder. But outside the prison walls, the internet didn't stop talking. In May 2026, a brand new documentary titled The Crash began streaming globally on Netflix, throwing this case right back into the center of public debate. The documentary featured something the world had never heard before: Mackenzie Shirilla's very first interview from inside the walls of the state prison. Sitting across from filmmakers, looking older, her face framed by the stark, sterile visiting room of the correctional facility, Mackenzie maintained her innocence regarding the murder charge. "I'm not saying I'm innocent of the tragedy," Mackenzie said quietly into the camera. "I was the driver of a tragedy, but I am not a murderer. I know nothing about it was intentional, because that's just not in my character." When the director pressed her on the convenience of her memory loss, how she could remember everything up until that morning, but nothing about the actual 5 seconds of acceleration, she doubled down on her POTS diagnosis. The most logical speculation seems to be a medical emergency. "I'm unsure of the exact physics of it, because I have no recollection, but I know who I am. I love them." The documentary also forced Mackenzie to confront the issue that had fueled so much of the internet's hatred: her post-crash TikTok videos. "I feel like anybody's social media isn't really them," Mackenzie explained, trying to defend her 17-year-old self. "It's how they want the world to see them. And at the time, that's how my 17-year-old brain was wanting to be seen. I wanted to pretend everything was okay because I couldn't handle the reality of what had happened." The release of the film caused a massive rift across online true crime communities. On platforms like Reddit, thousands of users began reanalyzing the evidence. Some viewers found themselves feeling a strange, unexpected wave of empathy. They argued that a 17-year-old girl with a documented medical history of heart rate issues could genuinely have suffered a syncope episode. They questioned whether it was truly fair to lock a teenager away for life based on an electronic black box that couldn't account for biological anomalies or muscle spasms. But then, the counter-arguments hit the web, and they hit hard. Crime reporters and legal analysts began releasing thousands of pages of newly unsealed text messages and police files that the documentary had completely glossed over. One specific text message, sent by Mackenzie to Dominic during a vicious argument just months before the crash, went completely viral on social media. She explicitly wrote that she was going to kill someone and just wanted to bang her head on the wall until she was dead. When you read that text message in isolation, you can try to write it off as typical, dramatic teenage hyperbole. We've all seen people say intense things when they are incredibly angry or emotional. But when you place that exact sentence next to a crash where she accelerated a vehicle to 100 miles per hour and drove it dead straight into a brick wall without ever hitting the brakes, it stops looking like hyperbole. It starts looking like a psychological blueprint. It starts looking like a promise. The final verdict is yours. So, now we find ourselves right back where we started, on that quiet, empty stretch of Progress Drive at 5:30 in the morning. We have looked past the courtroom arguments. We have looked past the polished TikTok filters, the viral documentary interviews, and the complex medical terminology. We are left with the raw, cold physics of a tragedy that took 2 young lives in a fraction of a second. This case is so deeply unsettling because it forces us to confront a terrifying reality about human behavior. It forces us to ask how well we can ever truly know the people around us, or the people we claim to love. Was Mackenzie Shirilla in trouble? Volatile young woman reached her breaking point. Look at her boyfriend,
cliffs or
Decided
you
that
just
if she
goes
couldn't
up?
control
They're
their
like in
future,
my like
she would end it for
like
everyone right then and there.
look at
Those
fire.
5 seconds of acceleration, a calculated, cold-blooded execution. Or was she just an incredibly unlucky teenager with a ticking medical time bomb in her chest, who blacked out at the absolute worst psychological moment, and whose natural teenage coping mechanisms were twisted by an angry online mob hungry for a villain? The state of Ohio has made its decision. Mackenzie Shirilla will spend her youth behind bars, staring at the concrete walls of a prison cell. But as you sit here at the end of this story, looking at the telemetry, the toxic history, and the devastating aftermath, where do you stand? Do you see a calculated executioner? Or do you see a tragic accident that spiraled completely out of control? Because how you choose to answer that question doesn't just define how you look at Mackenzie Shirilla. It defines what you believe about the dark, unpredictable depths of human nature itself.
Is there anyone else?
I would like Mackenzie to address the court.
Mackenzie, you don't have to speak if you don't want to. It's up to you. Okay? You can sit if it's more comfortable, whatever's better for you.
The families of Dom and Davion, I'm so deeply sorry. I hope one day you can see I would never let this happen or do it on purpose. I wish I could remember what happened. I'm just so sorry. I'm heartbroken. I love Dom and Davion. We were all friends and Dom was my soulmate. I wish I could take all your pain away. And I'm so sorry.